Good morning, everyone. Can we hear in the back?
Yeah, good morning.
Excellent. My name is Darren. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the executive director of LAVA. LAVA is the Los Angeles Venture Association. If you're not familiar with it, we're actually celebrating 40 years this year. So we've been around a really long time. I've changed it a lot since. If you've been around LAVA, like say 10 years ago, it's a very different organization. We're very focused on lobbying Congress over issues like carried interest, which just apparently got put on the chopping block again, thanks to Trump this morning. And so life is fun today. So we work with VCs. We brought a lot of family office into our ecosystem. And as I was talking to Mark with our TDG here at UCLA, we're trying to bring more and more. So if you know high net worth individuals in the city of LA, please refer them to me. And if they're looking to invest in early stage types of solutions, solving problems for humanity, which hopefully, we're going to talk about here today. We're broken up into all different industry sectors. We actually do have a Bruins at Lava. We're here at UCLA, so I'll plug that too. And we have Lava Bio as well. And so that's where we do a lot of the work on things like this. So enough of the sort of shameless plug. My role is to help facilitate more collaboration between the different nodes of our ecosystem, especially with investors and innovators. And so that's largely what we're going to talk about here today with regard to health tech. And as you all are mostly, I assume, part of the LA ecosystem, so you know how strong our region is, despite the fact that we don't get ranked on a lot of people's lists because we're so geographically spread out. And that's something else that we need to get each of one of you to begin to evangelize our ecosystem, educate yourself on how strong we really are in this space. So that's enough of me talking. The panelists have way smarter words of wisdom than I do. So I'm going to let you folks introduce yourselves, and we'll start at the other end with Madeline.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline Darcy. I'm the founding partner of a venture firm called Kaya Ventures here in LA. We focus on early stage healthcare innovation. A lot of our focus right now is on women's health and the care economy. I'm really glad to be here today.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eva Serna. I am the vice president of our life science and healthcare group at JPMorgan. My role specifically, we focus on early stage companies pre-seed to seed. And I run the Southern California market, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And I'm really excited to be here today with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Kesar. I'm a principal at Upfront Ventures. We are a early stage generalist fund. I'm one of the folks that focuses on healthcare there, investing in everything from care delivery to tooling and life sciences.
Hey everybody, my name is Ben Kromnick. I lead the healthcare and life sciences business for Mercury, which is an early stage banking platform focused on earliest stages of the founder development process.
Great, thank you. So today in healthcare, we have a lot of the big players and brand names starting to get into the space. How is that influencing your strategies in investing? And the way that this can run is if you have a really strong opinion about it, then jump in. But if you don't, we don't have to have everyone answer every question.
I'm happy to kick it off. So I used to cover retail in addition to covering healthcare in my consulting days. This is an interesting one. I mean, the truth is they've been in and looking at getting into healthcare in many ways for a long time, whether we're talking about the Walmarts of the world, where we're seeing folks like Amazon in the tech world. I say particularly, we're looking at things in terms of prescription and pharmacy. I think that's a stronghold that Amazon has had, but also one that we've seen with Walmart. We've obviously seen the physical clinic side, I'd say, be challenged in the retail model. I think they have figured out that reimbursements are really hard. And when you're going alone at that as a retail giant, that can be a challenging place to be. That being said, there are other areas like insurance. We've seen with Amazon as well, looking at data and AI. Even folks like Best Buy have been in the space. So I think the general advice would be, if I'm looking at this as an entrepreneur or founder, healthcare is so much about distribution. How do I partner as that relates to distribution? How do I get to the customer that I wish to be served? And ultimately, as I look at even, again, Amazon, who has, I would say, been reasonably successful in the space, they've been successful through acquisition, right? Through PillPack, now building out their pharmacy business, through One Medical, now building out their virtual care business. I think it was called Haven, JPMorgan and Berkshire Hathaway collaboration, which then didn't work, right? And I think part of that is you really need deep integration with healthcare players. And I think it is an acquisitive space. So if you can find a strategic wedge where your startup can add value, I think that could also be an interesting acquisition discussion.
So there's another section of really big brands that are entering the healthcare innovation space that are also leveraging their distribution advantage, which is the really large systems who over the last 20 years has been so much consolidation across the healthcare space. You're looking at the large cancer centers like Moffitt and their massive network, looking at the Mayos of the world, or the MGBs or the MSKs or the Cedars-Sinais in our backyard, who they have these massive global innovation brands. They're able to attract those top-end researchers and technologists. They have these massive systems. I mean, there's Cedars-Sinai in like Thousand Oaks now. So the catchment for these massive systems allows for this huge amount of distribution, which if you are a new technology, just getting to those patients can be so challenging. And you can solve the whole thing in one system if that system does actually purchase you and integrate you in. And they all have their own investment funds. They all have their own incubators, and they all have their own internal IP programs, which are really interesting. They're new though. So they're figuring out the innovation motion, which can be an opportunity. It can also be a huge challenge as you are partnering with health systems. It's not easy. Just as much as working with Amazon or Walmart is very much not easy. But I think it's a fascinating space to grow. And I do think Mayo is probably doing the best at it.
I would just add, not to be afraid. You know, it's intimidating, the big players out there, but think of what it is you're offering. Are you offering something that's generic, or are you specializing? Are you finding a niche market? And if you are, just know that because you're smaller, you have the agility to iterate quickly. So if you think about it that way, you know, how can I complement the services of these larger companies? So just from a strategy standpoint, you know, to Madeline's point, if you do have something to offer that they don't, then think of them as a partner strategically for the network, for the distribution, for the brand recognition. So I truly think that, you know, depending on what it is you have to offer, it should not be intimidating. And I think that's something that's very not widely said.
So I'm glad you mentioned Cedars. I was just at the accelerator yesterday and talking to their sort of technology innovation. They've got about they have $100 million in the venture fund, and they've got 50 to 70 million that they do on average every year into their tech portfolio. And so if you are a founder in this space, they are looking, I think personally that that's a better route to go, because it's not that like you're a little guy going after the big guys. You're a little guy with the big brother behind you, right? And, you know, they can help you beat up the other bullies.
So there's some pros and cons to those systems. So I was the head of product at a company who went through the Cedars-Sinai Technology Accelerator like 2 iterations ago when it was run by Techstars. And the advantage was the brand, right? We got to use the Cedars logo on the slide. It was huge. The investment terms are very, very aggressive because they know what they have. And so what's really fascinating is you look at these health systems, they are almost all private equity owned or private equity backed. They are massive balance sheets. And so I often find founders who they come into a health system, they're pitching it like it's a venture play, talking to a venture fund, and they're actually not always talking to a venture fund. Sometimes they're talking to a private equity fund and they don't know it. And I find it to be a huge challenge if you walk into a hospital system expecting to get the same terms you're going to get from an Upfront or from a Kaya. They're coming from a different perspective, and your value to them is more of a balance sheet accretion than it is the venture portfolio return. So understanding those economics, working with a large retailer or a large hospital system is really important as you think about your fundraising strategy.
Okay, so I love what you just touched on, and I would love to dig further into that. But at the same time, I also know that I have this whole list of questions that we have to cover, that would be a really good one. I think the lesson there, though, is to recognize that there's a lot that you don't know. Case in point, right? And that having an experienced sort of mentorship pool around you is critical, especially leaning on the TDGs and on other elements that are here in the ecosystem for you. Okay, so the next question that I know we started kind of talking about this in the hallway, and this turned into anyway, I'm just going to jump right into it. How do you anticipate the current administration's policies will impact healthcare investment, particularly in the overall investment landscape in the public markets? So I don't even want to weigh in. I'm just going to let you guys talk.
I'm going to start with a broad statement that I think all of us on this stage can agree on, which is expect the unexpected. There are grant funding a couple days ago was off the table and now it's back on the table. You have people like RFK who are coming in to the administration. Apparently Dr. Oz, I would just say it to everyone in the room is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure that whatever you're thinking about, from if you're doing a reimbursement strategy or a go-to-market strategy or have any sort of regulatory tension that could come up in the future, that you keep very close contacts with folks who understand and know what's going on in the administration. But don't think that you know what is going to happen, because I guarantee that it's probably not.
I would just add to that, obviously it's a fluid situation, but in any administration, you never know what's going to happen. So the important thing is to focus on your company, on your IP, and how you're creating that. The US has one of the strongest IP systems in the world. So, focusing on yourself, how you're going to go to market, how are you going to create the cash flow? Again, there's a lot of noise out there, but focus on your company, focus on whether or not you have a niche in what you're doing. And I think the rest will kind of sort itself out somehow.
I'd also think, though, about how everything is related. So, for instance, one of the areas that we invest in is the care economy. If you think about who are the care workers, who are frontline workers, something like immigration plays a large role in that. And though we can talk about advances in AI and everyone's going to have a personal chatbot plus an AI system, we're not there now. And so I would also say, in addition to focusing on your own company, really do think about what are the implications of policy changes across the board, because things are much more connected than I think folks often realize.
Wow, are we done?
So I want to reiterate something that was said earlier, which is maintain a connection with your counterpart in the federal government or state government, wherever that granting agency is, or the regulatory body that is going to be important to you. Don't go to them when you need them. Call them now. Like, it's the next phone call you make when you leave this room. Just say hi. They're having a really bad week. I'm doing like therapy sessions with my friends at the NIH and the HHS, and these are the most empathetic, caring, driven, civil servants we have. They go out here to help us be healthier and happier. And they also have these PhDs or they've been, in the armed services for 20 years. They want to talk to you. And I find that the grant process is so often so intimidating, and it lives behind this terribly designed website that controls your fate. But there's an email that's listed on that website that they answer. They actually answer those emails, and they really, really want to hear from you before you submit your grant. And then after you submit your grant, you're going to get a bad score. Do it again and ask them for feedback. But really create that narrative and that dialogue with them, whether it's about understanding policy changes or how their week is going, or they're selling Girl Scout cookies right now. But also your grant process, and it's essential.
Yeah, I think, Ben, your advice is critical, not just with the grant writers, but with all of the different portions of your network that you're going to need in the future. Mark and I and Jade were just talking at lunch about this with regard to how PIs have your heads down on your projects, knowing your science, and then you look up and you look for people that you need at the time that you think you need them. And the time to make those relationships is before you need them. And having relationships with the licensing folks, having relationships with potential CEOs, potential advisors, potential CFOs, so they get to know your personality. You're not trying to inform them who you are in 30 seconds or in this first meeting of 45 minutes, and you need money in a month because the grant is going to run out, right? You want to have these relationships a year ahead of time, and you want to have them see how you work through problems and have them give them the confidence that you can solve those problems. So I'm going to shift away from the administration because, like we said, it's fluid and who the heck knows what's going to happen. the shift to hardware software combos like GLP-1, wearables, what advice do you have to aligning different types of business models?
I think people are not going, well, okay, I think we can start with the idea of if you're going the consumer route or you're going the regulatory route, right? And I think a lot of folks get hung up on feeling like they need to put all of their eggs again in one of those two baskets. In certain situations, obviously that is the case. But I would say that as you're navigating that you spend as much time as you can seeing if there's an ability for you to crawl, walk, run in the more consumer space while going through the regulatory portion of what you have to deal with. We saw recently a company that is actually doing GLP-1 in lettuce. So they're re-engineering lettuce to actually have GLP-1 in it, turn it into little small pills, and then allow people to lose weight with an over-the-counter drug. Do I think that they will have the FDA knocking on their door at some point in the future? Absolutely. But at the same time, given just how our economy and how regulations work, they're capable to actually go get some feedback from patients, start seeing if there are actual results, and then going down the route that they need to with the government as it comes. So I would say, do both and don't get too stuck on thinking you need one versus the other.
I would add, so depending on, your wearable, thinking of cash flow, and this is from either the investor standpoint or the banking standpoint. What kind of predictable cash flow am I going to create with this wearable? Am I going to create a free subscription model? Am I going to, provide premium services? And what am I going to do with this data that I collect? Am I going to use it to give insights to the person wearing it? Or am I going to try to work with healthcare providers or research institutions? So, data monetization is something else to consider. That's another route. From the medical grade aspect, I would say just understand that it's going to cost a lot more money. But at the same token, you're going to be able to sell it at a much higher price. So really evaluating, how long that life cycle is going to take to get to the cash flow, or perhaps start with a, non-medical grade model and then work towards it in order to be able to recoup cash. As a banker, obviously we work with the early stage companies, but we're constantly looking at the clients to say, okay, when are they going to start to generate cash? And not so much for us, but for themselves, right? They're investing all this time, all this money. So realistically, what is the best path for them? And that's something that, companies should really consider.
So everyone should have some sort of SaaS fees, is what you're saying.
Well, I loved the Freed presentation at 11. He had his 3 models, the free version, the $99 version, and then the ultimate version. So, think of it that way.
Before Madeline speaks, I'll throw another model out there, which I just advised a startup that I'm mentoring right now, and that is that you could get a sponsored deployment, right? So there's a customer base that this particular brand has that the wearable will provide some level of both usable data and also cachet. And so it establishes a high premium value for this product because it's aligned with a high premium brand. And it being deployed, like people, it's a status symbol. It can also be a status symbol. So there's not just the ways that are out there, but you can also get really creative with how you deploy. Madeline, did you want to weigh in?
No. Good.
These are individual. So let's jump into, we'll go to Madeline. So Kaya Ventures has been known for investments in AI-driven healthcare solutions. How's the rapid advancement of AI technology changing your investment strategies or risks as you're evaluating it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're seeing things really, and there's probably a better way to do this, but 2 categories, right? Like, what is efficiency? So the advent of so many AI scribes that are being used in practices, we're seeing a lot of it in terms of billing. What can be done to make businesses more efficient, right? Specific to healthcare. But then I think what is also interesting is how much we're seeing in this expansion of what can be done. What can we do now leveraging AI that actually we couldn't do before? I was starting to think about more personalized medicine. Is there a world in which actually someone knows my own historical data, perhaps all way down to my genome, and my treatment actually looks different to what it looks like today, which is a step-step model of this didn't work as an intervention. What is the next thing to do? So we're thinking a lot about what that looks like in the context of startups we see. As we call out risks, I would say cybersecurity has been a large one as we talk around HIPAA and compliance. But beyond that, even in a world where we now have DeepSeek, we have models that we don't necessarily fully understand. What does it look like to be a startup building on that? Where does the data go? And truthfully, even within our own country, trust in institutions, as we talk about the administration, is something that is a challenge. And so as we think about healthcare data, I would say some of the most sensitive data that we have, what does that look like in the advent of startups? And I think this applies to so many of folks who are startups then working with health systems or working with established players. How do they see you as a risk, right? And how are you de-risking yourselves in order to be the best partners? I'd say on opportunities, there's so much to be done. I think I've been fascinated by the consumer appetite to be leveraging AI. And again, depending on your risk appetite, but people putting their lab results into a ChatGPT or an AI model, what can be deduced there that actually is really hard in today's environment to get just from your primary care doctor in a conversation. So I'm really curious about how AI is really being leveraged in that way. And then I think beyond that, this is a little bit beyond our scope, but there's a huge amount that's being done right now in, I would say, tackling more of the chronic conditions versus just rare diseases. And I think there's going to be a huge applicability of what's being developed now with AI models in that space.
I'm going to pause for a second. How many people in the audience are working at all with a certain amount of AI in their development?
Should be everyone's hands.
Right. Okay. So that's, I'd say, 35-40% of the room just raised their hand. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, delve into this a little bit more, and just ask, you just mentioned DeepSeek, right? Yeah. And before DeepSeek, ChatGPT came out and changed the landscape. I know of a venture fund that was an AI venture fund that when ChatGPT came out, it completely devalued the fund. They were ahead of the curve for years, but then all of a sudden they just got leapfrogged. Now you've got DeepSeek that comes out of nowhere and it leapfrogged OpenAI and Anthropic and all these others. How much of a risk is there aligning, do you feel like we're jumping into, is jumping in now too early? Is there a risk, or do you have to take that risk if you're going to be even in the game?
I mean, I think it really depends on the type of business you're building. I think so much of what we're seeing in healthcare is on the application layer. No one is necessarily trying to compete with a DeepSeek or an OpenAI.
Right.
They're not on that layer of infrastructure. And so I think a lot of it depends on what are you trying to do and how are you existing? How are you leveraging AI? I think it's going to require a deep understanding, right? If your product is going to be built on a model, you should understand what that actually looks like. And then truthfully, again, it's a lot on the data sensitivity. If you have claims data in an algorithm, if you are using, again, the data of individuals in a clinical study, how are you protecting that, right? And what does that look like from your own IP, your own ownership, how that can be leveraged? I think it's really just being smart on that case, but I think others probably have a lot to say too.
Just one point that I think I want to make that's in relation to AI as well, which is oftentimes in the past, technological innovation within healthcare has come from regulatory push, right? This is the first time in, I think, the history of the world that healthcare is like, oh shit, there's something out there that can really change the way that we deliver care. And Ben can probably attest to this, but even we are still so far behind from things like fintech or other industries when it comes to just basic technology that people are now looking at this as a step change. To your question, if you're making a foundational AI model in healthcare, yes, I would be very, very, very afraid of what the paradigm that DeepSeek is set, which is compute will go down, the cost of training models will go down, everyone will hit a certain commodity layer. And I think about it almost like Windows, Apple, Linux, Opera operating systems where people will have personal preferences of what they like to use, but foundationally, they're all pretty much the same. And to the point that was made earlier, the application layer is really where value is going to be derived. And every single one of those companies, I think in 2022, VCs came out and were like, oh, well, can't OpenAI do this or can't Anthropic do this? And the reality of the situation is that they have so much on their plate that they're already thinking about that Anthropic's not going to come out and deliver a AI agent for medical scribing. There's no point in it to it. But at the same time, if Anthropic continues to build much, much better models, those companies are going to be the ones that benefit from it the most.
I want to give a point of validation to that point that Julie Yu from Injuries and put a post out today saying almost like word for word what you just said. She's really smart and you're really smart. But talking about exactly that so much of the innovation in healthcare has been pushed from either from regulatory or from crisis. COVID forced a huge amount of change. And this is a new force, which is really interesting in healthcare. And it's somewhat encouraging that there's been like market driven innovation in healthcare, which is a bit of a new thing. But I want to talk about some of the unique components of developing an AI in healthcare, which is that like these foundational models are going to exist, but having a unique data asset is what's going to be the differentiator. Having the workflow is what's going to be that unique differentiator, and that is still really hard. Distribution is still really hard. And like medical scribing is like, I'm not currently allocating capital, but this is a thesis I'm not investing in, is scribing. Yeah. Because we know how to do that. We're really, really good at it. And it all gets commoditized all the way down to the foundational layer. We talked to a lot of the scribe companies, it is about creating that extra set of value. I think Freed talked about making providers happier. That's a workflow app. That's unique, but the foundational model isn't. So that unique, have that unique value proposition that defends you from the commoditization and the foundational models, everything. Oh, sorry. I have one last point, which is, Mayo Clinic did something really interesting. They changed their investment terms and their accelerator. So, they have a new thing called Mayo Platform. It's an amazing asset. It is a de-identified asset based on the electronic health records within the Mayo system. It's a massive amount of patient data that is now usable to develop AI models on. I think they take about $300,000 in in-kind equity. However, you're now no longer allowed to reference your embeddings. So that is a new term that they just added to their standard investment sheet, which is that you cannot actually reference the Mayo derived embeddings unless you do all of the compute on the Mayo platform. So we're even seeing health systems become technology companies because they recognize the value of totally secure, cybersecurity sensitive compute environments where you're also able to create these really, really unique derivatives of these foundational models. So it's really permeating both the investment world and the health system world in how we do this innovation.
I'm going to stick with you. You're supposed to go last, but I'm going to stick with you given what you just said. Given Mercury Bank's focus on serving startups, what shifts have you observed in how early stage health tech companies are approaching their financial strategy and runway planning in 2025? Particularly in response to the new environment, but I think we touched on that earlier.
Some are attempting to raise a lot more money. Right. So you get the people kind of chasing some of the Uber rounds, the mega rounds that are required to build foundational models or really, really expensive data assets, which is not necessarily a new thing. I'm really seeing a lot of companies raise less. So the way, we talk about this, like, what is going to be the first unicorn with a single founder? I'm seeing founders become so scrappy and push runway so much further, referencing much more non-dilutive capital because of what AI does for human productivity. And in healthcare, where these data assets are so complicated that the data munging and the data management tools, which used to be the beast of healthcare. I was talking to a friend about like these terrible claims data files. I asked him to stop because it was giving me PTSD. That just doesn't exist as much anymore. So founders can go so much further, with so much less money that they're able to get to the workflow improvements so much quicker. So the trend is there's a little bit of mega round. There's a lot more no round, a lot more scrappy, bootstrapped, or non-dilutive funding, or taking the like pre-seed money direct into the Series A or into like a large seed. So you weren't in our conversation earlier at lunch, but when you look at a normal curve of distribution of how things are happening, are you seeing there's a normal curve and that the mega rounds are kind of out here on the right? and what does that normal curve look like? Is it one hump or are there a couple humps? So I think we saw seed rounds get bigger, right, over the last couple of years, but also taking longer to get there. And so I think what's happening is the mean amount of money raised per time is moving towards zero. It's like that curve is shifting left, but but they've got validation. So when they have validation, like that seed is an A round now. It's a three. I mean, the average seed is between like 2.5 and 3.5 million now. Maybe it's more than that on like a 15 million plus valuation in health tech. That used to be an A round.
Yeah.
So I think we're kind of skipped seed, and now the pre-seeds are workable, and they're much more blended with a bootstrap model. Yeah, it's interesting. That curve is definitely moving to the left.
Got it. I'm going to let the audience, we are going to have some time for questions. So if you're thinking about them, anything they're talking about, with Ivo, with JPMorgan's unique perspective across both traditional healthcare and emerging startups, how are you seeing relationships between big healthcare corporates and early stage innovators? Kind of where we started.
Yeah. So the relationship between healthcare corporates and early stage founders is very quickly evolving. And it's being driven by the need for better efficiency, innovation, and improved patient outcomes. Specifically in my role at JPMorgan, I have seen this firsthand with an initiative of the bank called the innovation economy. So, the bank has always supported innovation, but we really solidified and formalized this initiative in 2016 of the U.S. innovation economy. And so what does that mean? Basically, the bank saw a need to really, they saw this massive growth and they said, wow, we really need to focus in and create partnerships from startup to IPO. So that formalized in 2016. 2017, we started in the UK. The innovation economy, focusing on venture capital-backed companies, we're now in 52 countries with 19 of them bankers, financial services on the ground. To date, we've now hired more than 450 individuals specifically focused on the innovation economy. Globally, we're now more than 9,000 companies in all sorts of space. And so what we're doing is bridging the gap from when you're early stage to IPO. So we are hitting every service level we possibly can. So from the early stage, the founders, people in this room, incubators, accelerator programs, CRO, CDMO, VCs and their general partners, the healthcare systems. We want them all, right? Because we want to learn from them. And we're doing it at a very rapid pace. And so how does this happen on a day-to-day basis? So as I mentioned, our group specifically caters to early stage companies, pre-seed to seed. And our group is formed of professionals like myself in the finance industry, MBA. But the really cool part is that we also have experts in healthcare, PhDs, scientists. So if you're in this room and you're like, do I really want to go the medical route? Guess what? JPMorgan is actually hiring doctors and MDs because we understand that when we're sitting there with startups, you need people like myself, but we also need scientists and so on. So what we're doing on a day-to-day basis is giving these clients like a full service suite of services to help them grow quickly. Everything that you would need for a startup, whether it's banking, cap table, credit, and really building ecosystem events. So what we're really doing is a lot of like curated events, panels like this, where we bring in our clients, we bring in COIs, VCs, all sorts of different partners. And we're also reaching across business lines. So we're bringing in the private bank, the investment bank, our venture capital arm to ensure that we're bringing all the right players to the table. And this is very important for early stage founders because everybody, as an entrepreneur, everybody in your circle should be working for you. And if they're not, you need to find a new circle. Just kidding. But, in short, because we're able to see this global perspective, we recognize the need to have the early stage founders quickly and very early on connect with the healthcare corporates, especially because we also bank these kind of companies. So, we're also, we have a venture fund called Morgan Health. So ensure,
I'm definitely looking forward to doing events with you.
Yes.
And events for sure. Sure. I don't mean to cut you off, but we got the high sign on time.
Oh, okay.
So
one last point.
My favorite question is coming up. So.
Sorry, one last point. We're doing this across multiple industries. So not just life science and healthcare, disruptive commerce, fintech, climate tech. So the innovation economy doesn't just encompass healthcare and life science. We're doing it across all industries. Sorry, there you go.
Great, thank you. I didn't mean not last question because I did want to try to get to the audience, but I do want to ask my favorite question of Kesar with regard to the LA ecosystem and everything Upfront's doing here. Can compare and contrast Boston with San Francisco, and what do we have going for us that they don't?
Yeah, just to preface this, I'm an LA native, so shout out Pasadena. So I'm highly biased in this conversation, but I think you can look at a couple of different areas. First and foremost, density of large organizations. We've talked about a bunch of them today. Cedars, UCLA, USC, Kaiser, Providence. You go down the road to Orange County, you have one of the biggest medtech ecosystems in the world. You go farther down the road to San Diego, you have one of the biggest biotech infrastructures in the world. The second thing is this is a highly diverse place, right? So like you are building technology in healthcare, not just for one specific type of person, but for or for a group of people, right? And you have different demographic diversity, you have different socioeconomic diversity, age diversity, so on and so forth. That allows for when you're building in Los Angeles to actually know that no matter where you go in the country, the thing that you're building is going to work. Boston will always have their biotech ecosystem. They will always be an incredible player in the space. San Francisco, you can have AI. I'm not as really worried about that. There's some great organizations up there like UCSF that are very forward thinking. New York, I think, is the other big up and coming ecosystem in health tech. And you're seeing a lot of folks, again, use the diversity there as well as the ecosystem there of hospitals and health systems. And one point that I want to make that's really important is a lot of the organizations out here are very forward thinking when it comes to actual innovation and being able to take a leap of faith on an organization or a startup that might not necessarily be as well established. We've talked about Cedars and their venture arm, but I've seen Cedars partner with actual startups that are at the Series A stage and don't need to be, the Abridges of the world that have gone and done this at 17 other organizations. So those are kind of, I guess, the big things that I think set us apart. And also just the tech ecosystem out here is much more closely knit, and you will probably be able to get in front of whoever you want to get in front of out here if you just utilize your network in a meaningful way. And I think that that's something that not only is great for organizations, but it also means that innovation can happen much faster. And I think we'll always be up and coming to a certain extent, but I would argue that we've probably made it at this point.
Great. We had a generic question for everyone. We're going to skip that. That question was, what do we advise all entrepreneurs should really be doing? There's a ton of people in the audience who could actually answer that question. I'm happy to answer that question if you come up to us. Dave Whalen is probably happy to answer the question.
Dave, get off your phone.
I had to give a shout out to Dave. But I would love to, two questions from the audience, I think, is, do we have a mic for the audience? So first question came up right here. Hand went up right away. And then the guy in the back who's got a hoodie on.
Hi, Helene Servion, big fan of Madeline, Darcy, and Ben Kromnick. Shout out to these guys. I run a venture fund called Journey One Ventures. We do frontier health and wellness. And we talked about smaller rounds. And my question was around non-dilutive financing. And what type of structures are you seeing in the market right now for pre-revenue and post-revenue companies in healthcare and life science for non-dilutive capital, and who's doing it? Who's lending?
So for lending, I'd actually love if Avek would chime in, but I'll talk about grant capital really quickly. So there's the SBIRs, there's BARDA, there's ARPA-H, but there's a type of capital I think is underutilized, especially in the startup space, which is contract revenue from the federal government. If you're in cancer, the NCI has a $35 billion budget. They want to give it to you. They need your technology. They will license it from you, and you can book that as revenue very early stage. And they're looking at the SBIR pipeline as a place to go find those technologies. So having a non-dilutive grant strategy from the beginning can help you get significant amounts of contract revenue. We're talking tens of millions of dollars. So there are companies that only build in that pipeline, non-dilutive capital. But then there's the entire lending space, which I would love if Eva or anybody else can chime in.
Sure. And while she's getting the mic, I'll just say that I literally was on the phone 2 days ago with someone who will lend against those contracts.
Yeah.
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 So our group specifically, as I mentioned, is pre-seed to seed. The majority of our companies at this stage are pre-revenue. So I don't want to be the bad banker here, but lending is difficult. Lending is difficult. And this is why I talked a lot about cash flow and, creating revenue models that will eventually get you funding. With JPMorgan, we're looking at funding probably at the Series A round on venture debt. But otherwise in the early stage, realistically, it's difficult. Other than say grant funding or as Ben mentioned, getting funding on maybe receivables, contracts, things like that.
Great. And then there's someone else with a mic, I think.
Hi, in the back here. Nutte van Belsen from the Netherlands. I'm the co-founder of CC Diagnostics, where we detect cervical cancer before it's there. Eva, I have a specific question for you, because I'm from Europe and I have a fellow Europeans with me. We would like to learn, because the thing we lack in Europe is big companies who can acquire cool startups like we. So we're all aiming to get collaborations with US-based companies.
Okay.
How to best position a European company to be able to work with these bigger US institutions and to work towards, which we all love, cash flow.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
a Cedars sweatshirt, isn't it? It's a Cedars Accelerator sweatshirt you're wearing right there. I knew I saw you yesterday.
And sorry, I didn't catch what country you mentioned.
Netherlands.
Oh, Netherlands.
The
I'm sorry. Yes.
That's
Okay.
really tiny, but okay, we're still there,
The Dutch.
So first and foremost, I would probably get you connected with the banker we have in the Netherlands, because I wouldn't. Every country is different with the rules and the regulation. So understanding how you want to bring your business here is obviously very important. Depending on what stage you're at is another thing. Whether or not you want to actually expand in the U.S. market, or if you're just looking, depending on what it is exactly you're looking to do. I'll be honest with you. Regulation here in the U.S., as in the last few weeks, is difficult, right? So it's hard to predict. So it would really. The short answer to that is, depending on what type of company you're looking to pursue, would depend on what partners we would introduce you to. But I'd be more than happy if I can to make those connections. Yeah.
Great. Any other answers to that question? No? Any final words that anybody wants to throw out there to this particular audience?
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being here. Madeline, Eva, Kesar, and Ben. Thank you in the audience.